Welcome to Right Now with Scrivener, where writers talk about how they work, how they develop their ideas, and how they use Scrivener, the app built for long-form writing projects. I'm your host, Kirk McElhearn, author of Take Control of Scrivener. Today I'm very happy to welcome Holly Seddon. On Holly's website, she says, I write novels under cover of darkness. What does that mean? You don't write in bed under the covers, do you?
What it meant was, when I first started writing, I was writing early in the morning and late at night because I had 3 very young children. I now have 4 children, but they're not very young. So it was snatched time that often seemed to be, and also undercover darkness, because I didn't tell anyone I was writing a book when I was first writing a book as well. So
really?
Sneaky, yeah.
Even your husband didn't know?
No, my husband knew, because I, was blank-faced and staring at the laptop all the time. So he had to know, or he would have thought something had terribly wrong with our marriage. But I didn't tell anybody else, even my parents.
So you were working as a journalist at the time. On your website, it says you worked for numerous national newspapers, magazines, and websites, and you didn't tell anyone.
No. So I'd been a journalist. I'd worked for a few different, what we used to call, I guess, it was web journalism. Now it's all journalism. But I was actually freelance when I started writing the book, and I was sort of pinching bits of time. And so I was always on my laptop and always working, but I did have a little bit more time to actually get stuck in. And I was sort of working around the children. Like I say, the children were young, so I was sort of a freelancer. And every minute that I spent on my secret novel no one knew about was a minute I wasn't billing somebody else for. So it was an interesting time. I felt very indulgent, but I'm really glad that I did it.
But this is the experience that I think a lot of our listeners have, who are trying to write fiction, trying to break into publishing, working in a full-time job, doing something else. What's the balance like? How do you switch one off and switch one on?
I think it really comes down to, this sounds hard, but how much you want it, because you are taking time from other things. You're taking leisure time from yourself. You are a distracted person. You might turn down social events. If it feels like a chore, if it's not something that you feel like you have to do, you're not going to do it. So partly that driving need is what keeps you on it. But for me, I also, I started to sort of, so me and my husband at the time, so he's still my husband, but at the time, we used to take it in turns to get up with the youngest at the weekend. So one of us would have a lie-in and the other one would get up. Now the kids don't need us getting up, and we get up much earlier than they do. But instead I gave up my lie-in. That was my time when I'd do my writing. And you just find that actually when you stop watching TV that you're not particularly bothered about, when you put your phone down, there are quite a few pockets of time. But yeah, it is a choice, and you do have to make that choice. It's not going to write itself.
Not everyone can adapt to that sort of fragmented, write for an hour here, write for an hour there. But I think as a freelancer, you're better equipped to do that, because you're often shifting from one project to another. Yes.
And you'd be surprised. You might feel like you're not that person until circumstances force you to become that person. And it's either do it or you don't do anything. And being a freelancer, being a parent, both of those things, you have to learn to kind of spin different plates at different times, and pivot quickly as well. But for me, it was such a pleasure. And what I was writing about as a freelancer wasn't something that was a passion. It was the bills. And I gave it my best work. I didn't sort of slack off, but it wasn't my passion. So to be able to actually sit down and just, it did feel indulgent, and it also felt like a treat. I'm going to say it doesn't feel indulgent now. It's my job. It did then. So the more I saw it like that, the more I saw it as something I was rewarding myself with rather than punishing myself with. And that made a difference. But not everybody can do it piecemeal. And sometimes you do have to look at, okay, well, what can I do to claw myself? Could I go down to 4 days a week at work? That's tough for a lot of people. Could I dedicate the whole of Saturday and say no to social stuff? Possibly. There's other ways to do it. Some people get up at 5 a.m, and find that quiet headspace time before they have to do anything else. So there are lots of routes, but unless you are somebody who has enormous leisure time and probably an enormous bank balance, you're going to be making some cuts and some decisions along the way.
The bank balance thing is important. And I think there was a study here in the UK some months ago about how much writers earn, and the fact that if you don't have a trust fund or parents paying for your rent or whatever, or living with your parents, it's very hard to break into writing. And of course, the difference is if you're already a writer of some sort, like a journalist, you're not doing something totally different. But it is, you've got to carve out that time. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I would add to that it's also really badly paid. So people working in publishing, it can be really hard to break into without really family support or having to take second jobs and things like that. And I really, really feel for people who don't necessarily have those advantages and whose voices are missing. That's not to say that nobody does break in from poorer backgrounds, but it is tough and it is hard. For me, I couldn't have stopped working and declared myself an author. I had to pay the bills. Most people have to pay the bills. So, love and good luck if you don't, but I did, and most people do.
So this is your first novel, Try Not to Breathe. What happened when you finished that final draft and started approaching agents? What was the process like?
Firstly, it took me quite a long time to finish it because it was very stop-start, largely because of the working freelance, also because of family situations. When I finally finished, I was at home. I was signed off work. I was recovering from an operation, and it was the first kind of enforced downtime I'd had in a really long time. And I thought, I can tinker with it, or I can just do it. I've had a run of bad luck. I'm feeling miserable. Let's just give it a go. What is there to lose? So I sent it. I sent the submission package to 2 agents.
Just 2?
2 initially.
That's pretty optimistic.
Well, it wasn't. I was going to send to a couple more the next day and a couple more the next day. I was just doing batches. So I sent it to 2, and the first person that I sent it to, 46 minutes later, I got a response asking, and I want to flag up this was luck, asking to read the full manuscript. The reason it's luck is because she later said that she just sat down with a sandwich at her screen, and as my email landed, I could not have planned for that. And obviously, if it was terrible, she wouldn't have asked for the full. But the reason it got read so quickly, that's very rare, and it doesn't mean anything good about me. It just would feel that.
Okay, so tip to new authors: send your emails to agents just before lunchtime.
Just before lunchtime, why not? It's worth a shot. And she replied and said she'd like to read the rest. And bear in mind, I was recovering from an operation, I had stitches. I jumped down from the sofa and I basically ran a lap around my house because I didn't know what to do. I had all this sudden energy and I ran around the house. My dog was running after me, yapping. He didn't know what was going on because I just didn't know what to do. And then I decided that the book wasn't ready. So I spent all night, and I mean all night, editing it. And I sort of fell asleep at about 5 a.m. And then I woke up to an email asking if I'd sent it and she'd missed it. And I thought, oh my God, I've blown it. And I said, I just wanted to have a final read through, and sent it off. And yes, and so the process for me was that then, and I think this is what generally happens when a full manuscript goes in, is an agent reads it, but if they think it's promising, they will also get reads from inside the agency as well. And I didn't know this stuff. So for any listeners, if it's useful, as well as selling your book to a UK publisher as a UK writer, an agency will hope to sell to foreign publishers for translated versions. They'll also send it out to America, potentially for a US version. This is if when they sell to a UK publisher, if they sell the world rights, then all of what I'm about to say is irrelevant because the publisher will take care of this. But if they sell UK and Commonwealth rights, and it often is, which is what ultimately happened to me, the agency will also want to sell to foreign publishers. They will potentially want to send it out to screen agents and producers who might be interested in it. So the people responsible for doing that at the agency also read and give their take, and they see if it has promise in the wider sense. So that, in my case, took a few days. And then the agent came back to me and said, it needs a lot of work. It did. But I'd love to work on this with you. And, would you like to meet up? And I still wasn't sure if that meant that she was actually going to represent me, because I thought maybe she's just being nice. Well, anyway, I mean, people don't say nice things like that in public because it's misleading.
Now you know that agents don't have time to pretend they're nice, right?
Exactly. And why would they? So yes, she did mean it, that she did want to work with me, and we met for lunch and we talked it through, and she said she'd represent me. And then the next step was she wrote me a fantastic editorial note, very similar to how an editor will when you have a deal and you work with an editor, outlining what worked well, what will work less well, sort of the themes that to tease out more, big structural changes, right down to smaller things. And then we worked on those edits for many months, and I would credit that experience as teaching me just so much. I mean, I later went on and did a creative writing MA, but I have to say that was almost like being submerged in something like a creative writing MA. I just learned so much from the doing. And my first agent was previously an editor, really hot on that stuff. So it was I had to really dig deep, and I felt like every edit I made, I felt like I was going to blow it, and she'd say she'd made a mistake and she didn't move it. But we got there in the end, and that was the process.
Now, you said that was your first agent. Not many people switch agents, and you've been writing for 8 years or so since the first book. So why did you switch agents?
So lots of people do switch agents, I would say. It's not something that is, publicly talked about, because it's a business relationship. Yeah. That sometimes, it's run its course, or sometimes an agent leaves agenting. It's happened recently with an agent, not of mine, but of very sort of well-known authors. It's absolutely fine. They have the right to do that. Sometimes I always liken it to being a football player, and the kind of team that you need around you when you're first starting is very different to when you're approaching your own years, or when you're thinking of moving into management. Like, your needs change, and my needs changed. And it was a difficult decision, as it always is, but it was the right one. And I think we both knew that, and I wish her well, and will always credit her with just, the most fantastic editorial help and experience, and absolutely wish her well. But it was the right time. And since that happening, and I have talked about it a little bit publicly, because no one talks about it publicly, and I want people to know it's fine. Other people have reached out and said they had similar experiences and have left agents, and glad it wasn't just them, and they thought they'd maybe done something wrong because they felt that they'd reached this point, and it's actually very normal.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about your most recent book and how you use Scrivener. Literature and Latte are proud to be long-term sponsors of NaNoWriMo. Completing a 50,000-word draft in just 1 month is hard, but picking the right app for the job will help you reach your goal. Tailor-made for long-writing projects, Scrivener is the go-to app for NaNoWriMo, combining all the tools you need to get writing and keep writing through November and after. Scrivener is available for Mac, Windows, iPad, and iPhone, and we offer an extended 45-day NaNoWriMo trial for the Mac and Windows versions. Look for it in the Sponsor Offers section of the NaNoWriMo forum. All those taking part can get a 20% discount on Scrivener for macOS or Windows using the code NaNoWriMo24 from October 15 through December 7. NaNoWriMo winners will get 50% off once their win is verified. We wish you the best of luck in reaching your goal this year. Your latest novel is The Short Straw, and this is a kind of Agatha Christie-esque story. 3 sisters, the car runs out of petrol, and they go to this old house, and it's dark and creepy, and you've got some twisted ideas. And I mean this in a good way. Both this one, and we'll talk about your forthcoming novel in a little bit. Are you really searching for the twisted ideas?
Searching, no. Surrounded by, yes. I think so many of us in this genre, I bet, are the same, but I grew up on horror books and scaring myself stupid. That was, I wasn't allowed to watch horror films when I was little. I wasn't, I was a very easily spooked kid, but books, they didn't know what I was reading. So I got away with reading books. I really shouldn't have read that early. And one book in particular was The Ghost of Thomas Kemp, which I was just obsessed with, but I didn't sleep properly for years. So I think that sort of horror, that sort of desire to sort of, I don't know, stick your hand towards the flame and read things that scare you has definitely gone into the books that I've written as an adult. Now, I don't write horror, but there's definitely something in me that wants to unnerve people and make them think, what would I do in that situation? I mean, that's always what I'm striving for, is for them to think, what would I do? This is probably the scariest book. Well, the next one's existentially terrifying, but...
Well, I was just going to say, I'm going to read the description of your next book, 59 Minutes. It is an ordinary evening. People are coming home from work, cooking dinner for their children, cuddling on sofas with their lovers, and then the message arrives, shattering everyone's world. Missiles are set to destroy England in 59 minutes. Everyone should seek immediate shelter. I'd say that's a little bit scarier, especially because this is a real threat, right? I mean, I'm old enough to have grown up with the duck and cover thing in the United States, and to have, when I was in grade school, we did these nuclear weapon drills where we'd go across the street to the basement of a building that had these crates of civil defense saltine crackers and barrels of water that we would survive on for however long. So this one sounds a little bit spookier. Do you want to just say a little bit without saying too much about 59 Minutes?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the book that I've been preparing for my whole life. So I was born in 1980. So I was 9 when the Berlin Wall came down. The Cold War was very much present in my childhood. It's something that's been an interest as an adult. I say interest, sort of obsession. I've listened to everything, read everything about it. I'm just obsessed with this, the brinksmanship and just all of it. But really what 59 Minutes is about for me is, how do people behave when all the rules go out the window and nothing matters anymore? And then how do you come to terms with how you behaved? Like, what you learn about yourself in that kind of extreme situation is you can't unlearn it. So it's the most existentially terrifying book I've ever written, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And yes, it sort of leapfrogs over any jump scares with scary cupboards in old buildings that we built through our.
How much of this was inspired by COVID?
Oh, that's a really...
You're talking about where all the rules have gone out and people have to, survive, but in a different way.
COVID definitely played a part in it, in terms of, I think it was such an interesting time of seeing the very best and the very worst of people. Like, really, people sort of leaning in and helping their neighbours, and at other times, especially some of our elected leaders, the most atrocious kind of behaviour and selfishness was exhibited. So yes, that's absolutely gone into it. I think also, possibly because of my age, or possibly just being the kind of kid who was scared of everything, I felt like we'd sort of forgotten nuclear weapons are in the background, and we kind of talk about them almost benignly just because they've been there a long time. I'm old enough to remember Chernobyl. I'm old enough to remember the Berlin Wall coming down, and recently there has been the accidental emergency alert that went out in Hawaii. I found that incredibly moving, hearing about, that was 46 minutes. And in that time, there were fights and there was help, and people put their children in storm drains out of, they didn't know what else to do. People got into bathtubs. No one knows what to do, and none of it will make a difference. And it's something that really we should be talking about a lot. And it's so enormous and so world-ending that we don't talk about it at all rather than a lot. And being the kind of person who, likes to stir things up, I decided to come and get involved and put myself in the middle and write a book about it. But this
is really interesting because, I mean, this is a book of genre fiction, right? But on a very serious topic. And it'll be interesting if people can react to this, because what you're saying, I can understand how you feel about that this is a visceral feeling you have about this sort of thing.
Yes, but to actually engage people as readers, you have to give them a good story. My interests around this have been there for 30 odd years, but there wasn't a route to write about them until I actually came up with the hook and then the characters. And then, because in the book, and obviously I don't want to give away spoilers, but it's about 3 women and how they spend their last 59 minutes, who they try to get to, who they help along the way, who they don't help along the way, and how they cope with what that means about who they are. So it is an absolute kind of rip-roaring adventure. It's incredibly fast-paced. It's absolutely a thriller. But underpinning it are these very big questions. And I think the hardest thing for me now, to be honest, this is something that I'm sort of constantly thinking about, is I don't think I could go back to writing, the short straw after this, because, first I've already written it, but, I've sort of...
That style of novel,
these really big questions. And actually it's given me a taste for exploring really big questions, but within a thriller framework, which is really exciting for me.
I noticed there's 3 women in 59 minutes and 3 women in the short straw. Coincidence?
Yes, actually, clearly I have that's interesting. I hadn't noticed. So you're really good. You're noticing. Are you an English major? I just read 100 some odd books a year and pay attention to these things. All right, let's talk about how you use Scrivener to write your novels. Have you used Scrivener since the first novel? Yes. So the first novel, I did it in, I think it was even Pages, because it came free with, no, I tell a lie, it was Word. And when I got my agent, my computer was dying, and I rewarded myself, bought myself a Mac, my first Mac. And I actually dug out the email to find it. It was, I think 3 days after I met my agent for lunch, and she said she'd represent me, I bought Scrivener, because I found the receipt, and I have used it, on every book subsequently. And I think I said when you reached out to me, I probably use about 5% of what it can do.
Everyone uses 5% of what it can do. It's true, but some people use a different 5%, right? And in the many interviews I've done on this podcast, every once in a while, someone comes up with a feature that is just not common that they really like. Are you a planner or a pantser? Planner,
and more so as I go along. Partly because I'm, once you're actually under contract, you have deadlines. And as a journalist, I mean, that's why I need deadlines anyway, so it works really well for me. But so I need to plan. And also, I've learned sort of the traps that I fall into through my writing, and planning helps me avoid those. I fall into other ones, and I always have to start again. Every single book, I have to start again, usually around 35,000 words. That's what it takes me to find things out. But planning absolutely helps.
I don't want to say all of your books because I haven't looked at them all, but many of your books have a lot of short chapters. This is your fast-paced style. Does Scrivener help with that, being able to manage all the short chapters in the binder?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly what's the most useful thing for me, is being able to sort of see it down. I'm waving around with my hands. I know you're not recording, but it's being able to see that binder, and being able to move things around, and being able, especially I often have multiple points of view. So being able to kind of sometimes I will write all of one point of view first, and then I'll be slotting the other points of view in, and just that kind of being able to see that overview. Because when I'm planning, I plan it as a spreadsheet, and then the next step is basically building that spreadsheet into Scrivener. So I will have all of the folders filled, and they will have about a paragraph, and then I'll put one scene in each of them, and they will have a paragraph saying what's going to happen. And I don't stick to it religiously once it actually gets up and running, and I find, other avenues pop up and new characters and things. But that's kind of my first step. So that's when Scrivener becomes really helpful. Then I do my first draft. Well, my first half draft, because I always go wrong and start again. But that's in Scrivener. The short chapters, it's worked out well and it suits the genre, but that's very much how I read and write. I get distracted. I don't have a great attention span. So I like things to be fast-paced and quick.
But it's also a journalist who's maybe used to writing 1,500, 2,000 word articles.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, the whole point, especially with web journalism, when you're really competing for eyeballs, is get the information into them fast. The news pyramid, the inverted news pyramid, the important stuff at the top, and then it gradually tails off. That's definitely all there. That sort of need to, be punchy, clear writing. And listeners will probably laugh at that because I'm obviously a waffler verbally, but when I'm writing, it's very on point. So I do these fast chapters, and I write my full first draft. Then I export it into Word, and when I've sort of gone through and edited in Scrivener, I export it into Word, and I send that document to my Kindle, and I read it as a reader. And I find that's when I really notice any flab. If I'm getting bored, it's boring, because I really am interested in reading it. So I look for those lags in pace. I make loads of notes. And then I edit that Word document. So this is probably a really clunky way of doing it. I edit that Word document based on my Kindle read-through. And then I use that Word document to rebuild a brand new project in Scrivener. And that's where I sort of do it bit by bit. So there'll sometimes be bits that aren't carried over. There'll be new chapters written, and I'll sort of piece it together, partly from new material and partly from that doc. And I always call it something like for chopping up, because that's literally what I'm doing. So I use Scrivener when I'm really doing the chunky stuff. And when I'm sort of moving on to the more line edity stuff, that's when I tend to keep it all within one document. And because publishing uses Microsoft products, it's Word. It wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, but that's what everybody uses, so it makes sense to use that. And then the only time I'll then go back to Scrivener is if, as often happens, the notes that I get from my editor are very structural, because then I have that need for that visual process again.
Okay, I like to ask my guests if they have a book that they could recommend to our listeners, something that you really like or something you've read recently. Do you have anything? I'm thinking that with what you said about 59 minutes, you've got a lot of history books and books about politics.
Yes. Well, there's a brilliant non-fiction book by, I think she's called Julie McDowell, and it's called Attack Warning Red. And she does a podcast called Atomic Hobo, which is brilliant, all about, she's a nuclear journalist, but there's loads of stuff about the things you were talking about, duck and cover. So, and loads of things about how, civil preparations and all of that stuff. And Attack Warning Red is about how Britain would have prepared. So it was about our bunkers and our alert systems and all of that stuff. And for a nerd like me, that stuff is just manna from heaven. I just love it. So I definitely recommend that. But then, because people listening might be listening because I'm a thriller writer, they don't necessarily want to read a really nerdy book about nuclear history, I would recommend absolutely anything by Gillian McAllister. And she has her latest book is Just Another Missing Person, which is currently out in paperback.
And she happens to be your co-host on the Honest Authors podcast, which I will link to in the show notes.
Thank you.
Holly Seddon, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow it in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. To learn more about Scrivener, go to scrivenerapp.com. Join us next month for another conversation on Right Now with Scrivener.